please welcome our host, Elliot Weiler. Thank you.
Sharman, thanks so much. I am Elliot Weiler. I'm your host for this half hour, coming live from my home, excuse me, from my home to yours. I want to start off by thanking all of you, members of our President Circle, Legacy Society, and CGA donors, for your tremendous support and your commitment to CR. You are at the heart of our mission to create a fair and just marketplace. Whether you are hurting financially or not, most likely you are concerned about the uncertainty in the U.S. economy as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. Joining us today, Annuitant and Christine Tetro, two of CR's legislative and financial experts, who will shed some light on that topic with information from recent surveys and focus groups, asking people how they are faring during these very turbulent economic times. We'd like, though, to begin first with an anonymous poll. If you'd like to join us with that, please do. Here is the question. What are the most pressing financial issues in the U.S. economy today? Is it the economic impact of the pandemic on families, education debt, affordable housing, jobs and unemployment, or all of the above? So if you're interested in taking the poll, we would be interested in seeing what the results are. We'll leave it up for a few more minutes. Might be hard to single out one or two. We might even have a tie here. One more person outstanding if you'd like to vote. There you go. Perfect attendance there for the voting. Great. Thank you so much. And we do have a tie. Share the results there. Looks like half of the folks participating today say it is the economic impact of the pandemic on American families, or all of those issues. There's certainly no wrong answer there. We appreciate your support in taking the poll. Now, let's move on to some introductions so we can begin what we hope will be a very interesting conversation over the next few minutes. We're joined again, as I said, by Annuitant, who is the Director of Financial Fairness and Legislative Strategy, and Christina Tetro, Manager of Financial Policy. So Anna, we'll start with you. Tell us about some of your background, and then tell us what CR means when we talk about the term financial fairness. What are we really trying to do with and for consumers?
Thank you, Elliot. I wear two hats at CR. I lead our legislative strategy across all of our advocacy work. So that's in Congress and in state houses. I also head up our organizational efforts focused on financial fairness. Prior to CR, I spent my career on Capitol Hill, largely focused on consumer protection issues. One of my proudest moments was working on the legislation that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau back in 2010. We define financial fairness pretty broadly here. We want the marketplace to work for all consumers, so we focus on the systems and structures that can create unfair discriminatory impacts on some consumers and limit their ability to achieve financial security. But we also want it to work for each individual consumer. So we look at scams and fraud, as well as hidden fees and other sneaky tactics that harm consumers. As our world goes digital, we've also spent a lot of time making sure that consumers have protections when they use digital payment and other financial services on their phones and computers. We want consumers to be safe when they spend, save, borrow, regardless of the technology they use.
And we're going to talk more about COVID's impact with you in just a minute, but I want to just pick up on one thing that you said, that you were part of creating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, which a lot of people probably have heard of. It has certainly been under attack. It has its supporters. It has its critics. Where does the CFPB stand now? What is sort of left of it? What is it? And what might it be moving forward under a new administration next year?
Sure. The CFPB was created back in 2010 as the first financial regulator focused specifically on protecting consumers, not on ensuring that banks were safe and sound, but that consumers were protected. It started off very strong, with a lot of action picking up on years of neglect in this area. Over the past few years under this administration, it's been a lot weaker. They've stepped back from enforcing the law, from returning money to consumers who've been defrauded, and have been much more deferential to the banks and the financial industry. But the good news is its authority is all still there. So we are looking forward to the next administration really taking a fresh look at the CFPB and moving forward on some key consumer protections.
Great. Thanks for the background there. Let's now return to what we've talked about. You really can't say it enough that 2020 has been an unprecedented year. Many folks will be happy to bid it farewell in about 29 days, I guess. So let's talk about how the COVID pandemic specifically affected your work, CR's work, and most importantly, the work that we do on behalf of consumers. You were talking a bit about some surveys that we have been conducting recently about people's finances. How did that survey get set up in such a short amount of time, and what have we learned from it?
Well, I think the COVID pandemic changed everything for so many people. And here at CR, we really focused a ton of our journalism on the health, on all the precautions, but also looking at the financial impacts. And here in the advocacy team, we all have very clear memories of the last financial crisis and the impacts it had on homeowners in particular. So as things started changing in March, we knew we wanted to have good information about who was getting hurt and how, so that we could move to address those problems as quickly as possible. We put out a call for stories in mid-March, asking people if they'd been financially impacted and if they could tell us their stories. And we heard from nearly 3,000 people in just a few days. We then set up an electronic focus group that enabled us to talk to 50 people for a couple days each month about how the crisis was in fact affecting them and how their lives were changing. And it was the same 50 people, so we were really able to see what was happening to them and follow up on problems they were having. And we tracked government databases to see what consumers were complaining about, where they were having problems with their banks, credit card companies, mortgage servicers, and others.
Great. And we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into those findings. I just want to remind folks who are joining us on the webinar, if you have a question for anyone on our panel, you can type it into the Q&A box in the Zoom window. It should be at the bottom of your screen, assuming that your layout looks something like mine. It is at the bottom. It says Q&A. Feel free to type it in there, and we'll get to as many of those as we can in just a few minutes. I want to bring Christina in now because you're going to actually take us on a bit of a deeper dive there. Anna talked about how CR really pivoted quite quickly because of what we were learning about the pandemic and its impacts on people's lives. Talk specifically about what we found out. What have we been hearing from people over the past, 10, 11 months or so?
Sure. I'd like to start with this slide. We're going to call a slide up here that'll actually show the economic impact of the crisis. And as you'll see when this comes up is the effects, as with the health crisis, the economic impact of the crisis has really fallen quite heavily on communities of color, and particularly Black and Hispanic households. So what you're seeing here is lost wages, cut expenses, falling behind. This is from CR's July 2020 survey. So there's a report out today, actually, not from Consumer Reports, but from the Federal Reserve called the Pulse Survey that actually shows that these numbers are actually worse. So there's about 1/3 of Americans who are unable to cover even basic expenses. So it's very worrying. I'd like to turn to another slide that will show what types of help people tried to access and the both success and difficulty they had in accessing that help. So we went out to consumers, this is nationally representative data from Consumer Reports, and said, these are the types of help that's available to you, whether it's under the Federal CARES Act, which was the relief bill passed back in March, or relief that was provided from lenders or other creditors, and ask, what is the difficulty or what's your chance of success? And as you can see, it's a mixed bag, right? So unemployment, people had trouble and then were able to access it. But it was almost 50-50 down the line for the rest of these types of products. Now, we wanted to augment our understanding of what this struggle meant, because the reason why this type of help is important is if you've lost wages, and we saw from that last slide that many households have, you need to do a couple things. You need to replace that wages, that's where unemployment comes in, and you need to cut expenses. So when we dug in and we saw that people were having difficulty in accessing help that they were entitled to, we wanted to do a deep dive on several financial products that our team is experts on, And we use the complaint database provided by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and our statistics team and our data researchers really dug in. And what we discovered were there were three broad areas where people were having problems. One was mortgage relief. So while the CARES Act allowed people with federally backed mortgages to seek and receive help from their mortgage servicer to skip their payments, when people tried to access this help, they were being told that they were going to have to repay those skip payments in a lump sum. You can imagine, to someone who is struggling with job or income loss, that would be a very scary message to receive. That actually was not true also. So we wanted to do something about making sure that servicers actually adequately conveyed to consumers reaching out for relief the full range of post-forbearance options so that it didn't scare away people who needed help from getting it. And we succeeded, actually. The federal housing regulators clarified that there was no lump sum required. A second area where consumers were having difficulty was accessing credit card relief. And credit card relief was not required under the CARES Act, but it's something that many households could benefit from, the ability to have a late payment waived or even forbearance on their monthly payment. We found that service providers were doing a pretty poor job of publicizing the availability of these programs and making sure that consumers got access to them. So we have noticed subsequently that service providers are making these policies much more prominent on their websites. And we are pleased to see that there's been some improvement in that area. The third area where we noticed particular difficulty was with credit reports. And it's convoluted, so I won't get too wonky here, but the CARES Act actually prohibits negative credit reporting if you have a formal agreement with your lender for a concession there, or an accommodation is actually the word. And what people reported was that they weren't getting that accommodation, that negative information was showing up on their credit report. And then there was the typical and long-term problem with errors on a credit report. And the reason why this is particularly concerning is your credit report follows you many places where you're not even seeking credit. So it can affect, in some states, the price you pay for auto insurance. It can affect your ability to get a job, all sorts of things. So we are eager to see negative information kept off of people's credit reports, because we don't think what's happening during the pandemic is indicative of your ability to repay out in non-crisis times, as well as we are concerned about the use of credit reports for non-credit purposes generally. So we've got a project launching in January where we're going to try and figure out the types of issues that consumers are having by asking them to pull their credit reports and tell us what they find. Just for everyone who doesn't know, credit reports are free once a week. Usually it's 3 reports for a year that are free, but thankfully right now you can actually pull your credit report. So more to come on that, and I'll pause here, but look for more information about that project in January.
Great, and we'll come back to you in a few minutes with a question. Thank you so much. And Anna, this is a good time to pivot, I think, in terms of what we'll be focusing on as CR in the new year. And it might be good just to clarify here, because we've been talking a lot about the CARES Act, and just so we're clear, are the protections that we just talked about, are they all finished in terms of they have expired, run out, and are we waiting for Congress to act again, which might reinstate some of those protections if in fact they have run out?
Some have run out fully, others are running out soon. I don't think back in late March, early April, when the CARES Act passed, anyone thought we'd go this long without a second one. There was an understanding that this was the first big relief bill and that more help would be coming. So things that are expiring include, at the end of this month, the forbearance on student loan repayments will run out. And the Department of Education just came out and said, it's going to be really hard to restart this for everybody at once. So we're pushing them to extend this a little further. One, because the economy has not recovered and people really need this relief, but also because it's going to be a mess to get that started up again. So yes, a lot is running out, and we have been working to push Congress to pass more relief because the crisis is ongoing. Employment has not bounced back up, and people are hurting. In terms of what our priorities, you've hit it. Getting some more COVID relief. That's probably our top financial priority going forward. And just tracking to make sure that consumer protections are included in these. Other things we're looking at are, I mentioned the CFPB earlier. They've taken some steps in the last few months that really worry us, and we're hoping that we can get the next administration to reverse. One of those, which we'll talk about a little more later, is a rule that the Bureau just finalized on debt collection. The rule gives debt collectors, one, vastly more ability to reach out to consumers in new ways, including through direct messages on social media. And two, it gives them a lot more ability to pursue debts without confirming that the person they are pursuing actually owes the debt. So we have a petition now to the CFPB, we'll get back to this in a bit, urging them to overturn that rule. And then, sorry, I meant to mention, Elliot, that we had some really big wins in the states this year. We haven't talked about the states, but that's a huge part of what we do. And in California in particular, we were able to help pass legislation that strengthens the Department of Business Oversight, which has traditionally been a very standard regulatory body, into a powerful state level CFPB with a real consumer protection mission. So we're going to keep up that work while also pursuing our federal.
I just want to ask you one thing on the upcoming COVID relief. It seems like every maybe week to 10 days, we get these little glimmers that there might be something out there. And I had to laugh because you and I talked about this yesterday, and I don't know, maybe 2 hours or so ago, I got an alert from CNN that talked about, this new chatter that has been happening this week. And then basically the last line of it said, like, don't bank on it. So politics still at play here. You've been on the Hill. You can certainly read the tea leaves like anybody else. What is your sense as to the realistic timing of when a CARES Act 2 or the HEROES Act or whatever ends up happening, the next COVID relief bill, when might that realistically happen?
I hate to pontificate when the news changes as fast as it does. A real relief bill that really does significant amount, I think we have to wait until next year. But in nine days, the federal government runs out of money. So they need to pass a spending bill, whether it's a large spending bill or what's known as a continuing resolution, where they just roll over and say, it's okay, we can keep spending money. Something has to happen by December 11th. And I have seen some chatter of maybe extending unemployment or some piece getting into there. But I would be hard pressed to believe that they're going to do a massive CARES Act type bill in the next 9 days. It doesn't seem realistic right now.
Okay, great. And I want to ask Christina a question, because you're sort of the expert and have done so much work on the data that CR has collected. One thing that I think strikes a lot of us is that perhaps unlike other recent recessions, this feels very different in that the people that are impacted by the recession are being impacted greatly and are not necessarily seeing any economic recovery in their immediate future. And then there are people who are privileged enough that have not really been impacted at all. They might be working from home. They might be heavily invested in a stock market, which I guess it was last week where the Dow crossed 30,000. It just seems very, very disparate in terms of what we're seeing out there. Does the data suggest that? And what does I'll ask you, again, this sort of realistic question, what does the recovery look like that might be inclusive enough to bring in everyone?
That's exactly right. What the data shows that lower income households are much more affected by job and income loss. Many of these households were juggling 2 or 3 jobs. Those jobs might be in the service industry or hospitality, which depending on where you are, may have been devastated. Bartender, server, hotel housekeeping, these types of jobs have basically disappeared. So although it's referred to occasionally as a K-shaped recovery, there is no recovery yet for financially fragile households. So a lot of these households came in with very few reserves, less of a safety net. So when they lost that job or income, it was just financially devastating. Now, a lot of this was I shouldn't say papered over. There was a lot of help that was received from the expanded unemployment. That was that extra $600 a week that ran through July. What we saw in the focus groups that we did was that when that ran out, that really created some financial hardships. So people started selling things that they had. There was one person in that study who was selling her plasma. So it really, the effect of that was immediate. What we are seeing now is greater anxiety at the thought of unemployment running out in December, which for many people affected by this crisis, that will be the last check that they get. So there's a tremendous urgency around getting people money. And that can take any number of forms, but that also means that relieving people of their debts, which is definitely a priority of ours, has been very much a focus. So the need is urgent. Getting people help should happen hopefully right away, although it sounds like obviously with the speculation around CARES Act, type relief for, we'll probably see that in the new year, hopefully.
Great, thank you. And just to sort of touch on some other work that that CR has been doing now for quite some time, Anna, I think you and I were the first two for the first webinar series that we did for our President Circle members. We're talking about What the Fee, which was probably, what, 2.5 years ago now? That's still an ongoing initiative. I think it's great. Do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about it and bring us up to speed on what the next fights are in terms of What the Fee?
Absolutely. I think it was about 2.5 years ago, actually, when we first had this idea of a project focused on hidden fees in daily life. We went actually President Circle and other donors and said, what do you think? Is this a good idea? And you all were so generous in supporting the effort. And in that time, we have done a lot of work on a whole range of fees. Our biggest success was almost in cable billing. Those hated cable bills where there's the broadcast TV fee and the regional sports fee. We did a study. We went out to our email list and said, send us your cable bill. We want to understand the fees. And 5,000 people sent us their cable bills. We were ill prepared for it. It was a lot of work to actually do the analysis, but it was super exciting. We were able to put out a report finding that people spend an average of about $450 per year on these hidden fees that aren't advertised. They're not in that base price. By going to Congress with this report, we were able to pass a law requiring that cable companies, when you get your quote, before you get off the phone, before you click off the internet, you know exactly how much you're going to pay in your first bill. It's not perfect. It's still, the advertised price you see is still, without the fees, but it's a good first step. We heard from people who told us they signed up for cable, then they got it, they got their first bill and they couldn't afford it. And then they called the cable company and they said, oh, you signed up for 2 years. If you want to cancel, it's a $100 cancellation fee. So they were absolutely stuck, and that should not happen anymore. We've also testified before the Federal Trade Commission about hotel resort fees and online event ticketing, Ticketmaster, those service fees and the printing fees. And last year, we took on a project that was very personal to me. with the airlines. People were telling us that they were being asked to upgrade or pay fees in order to ensure that they could sit next to their children on an airplane. As a mom, this shocked me. And then when this happened to my mother-in-law when she was traveling with my daughter, I got even angrier. And we went to the Department of Transportation and said, this is unacceptable. It's a safety issue and a money issue. And they said they hadn't heard enough complaints about it. So we went out again to our universe of readers and others and said, tell the Department of Transportation that this is not okay. And hundreds upon hundreds of people sent in their complaints. And I think we were making really good progress on this issue right before the pandemic hit. And since then, we've shifted our focus over to refunds for all the people who had to cancel their travel. But I think we can have a win here. Nobody thinks it's safe for a 3-year-old to be sitting somewhere else on the airplane from their parents. No business traveler wants to be sitting next to someone else's 3-year-old. It's just not appropriate. And I think this is one area where it's financial, it's safety, and it's just the right thing to do. So we'll be tackling that again. But all of this fits under that umbrella of what the fee. And it's just been a really exciting project.
It's really interesting. I think people might be suffering from outrage fatigue, right? There's been a lot of causes to get involved with over the past several years. And yet there's really nothing like a cable bill, a cable company, or an airline, because I think, to your point, Anna, you can relate to it in some way, shape, or form. We've all kind of been there, and I think the work that you and the others on the What the Fee team have done have really not only brought it to light, and it's not only a place where you can commiserate with others, but as you point out, it's a place where we actually have gotten some meaningful work done for the consumer, and that's just wonderful. So thank you for all your work on that. More to come, as they say, more to come. Well, as Anna mentioned, we are asking all of you watching, all of our CR members, to tell Congress to put consumers first. So on your screen, there's a webpage if you'd like to sign the petition, and we are very proud that we are approaching 60,000 signatures. I think Anna mentioned before the webinar began, we are 4 shy of 59,000. I'll round up for dramatic effect, so close to 60,000 people. This is to sign the petition about the debt collection practices that Anna had talked about earlier. You can read more about that, cr.org/CFPB action. We would certainly welcome your name there, and we will get to 60,000, so I don't have to use that dramatic rounding up anymore. This does conclude our conversation with Anna Layton and Christina Tetro. Thank you both for taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us. Very much appreciate all of your time and your work on these very important issues. For those watching, we will email you a recording of this event, as well as a link to the petition that I just mentioned and some other relevant information. Thank you again so much for joining us. We've done these throughout the year. It's certainly something that I enjoy doing. We like to talk about CR. We like to share it with people that support our mission and hopefully learn some things along the way. We will be back with our next webinar in February, so please check our calendar and your email inbox for that. Again, thank you so much for joining us. You keep us honest and independent, and we certainly appreciate your support along the way. We'd like to thank you again and wish you a very happy holiday season. We'll see you again next year. Thanks so much for joining us.